Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NovoVia radio show. Today, we have a really exciting guest, Kate Watson, one of my MI buddies and longtime friend, and she's here to talk to us about an area where we use MI that I'm not really sure how big it is in Sweden. So that's why I invited Kate along to give us a chat about what she does, why she does it, and how it can be helpful for our listeners. So, Kate, welcome to the show. And I don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Like you said, my name is Kate Watson. I live in Philadelphia in the United States, and I have been using and practicing and teaching other people to use and practice motivational interviewing for, I keep saying 15 years, but now that I realize I've been saying that for a few years, it's got to be getting closer to 20. Um, and you're right, I do use and teach motivational interviewing in a bit of a unique area. I like to call the field power-based violence. So I teach people motivational interviewing skills, but the people who I'm teaching them to largely respond to things like domestic violence or domestic abuse, sometimes child abuse, sexual assault cases, one that's really high profile right now, human trafficking. And so essentially we're talking about the kinds of violence that tend to result from power imbalances. You know, a person or a group of people having more power or control over another group of people or a person. So, for example, in the case of child abuse, you know, adults who may be abusing children, I'm using my hands here to indicate like the adults have a power stance over children. And largely the way that we think about things like sexual assault and domestic violence is that there's one person dominating or controlling the other person in that relationship.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. I thought a little bit about the groups that I coach and train, and a lot of them work in, for example, child welfare or other parts of like social services. So I'm wondering, is that also kind of an area where there might be a power balance between the helper and the person being helped?
For sure. Yeah. And so many of the people who I'm training identify professionally as victim advocates. Maybe they don't all exactly have that title, but that's a pretty common title in the States for people who do this work. And some of the victim advocates are getting their referrals from child welfare. And
Mm,
so it's child welfare workers who might be, you know, doing like home visits or check or a wellness visit. Maybe there was a call placed by the school or by a hospital to
mhm,
check on a family. The child welfare worker may do the check. They might be doing a full investigation on what's happening in the home. But what they'll often do is connect that family to a child advocacy center
mm,
where there may be advocates available to partner with the family, partner with the child in particular, and see if
mhm.
we can use like a team effort to help them get whatever resources or services they need for things to get better.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I think it's probably a little bit like set up a bit differently here in Sweden. But I'm wondering, it's probably kind of within the whole social worker role or job, that like you think of the rights of the child or think of the rights of the victim or
Mhm.
etc. So I think, but I don't, I'm curious. I'm gonna have to look up whether or not there's a specific like if people call others advocates here. So yeah. What do
Well,
you, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just to complete that thought about does it fall under the umbrella of social work? Yes. I think you'll find that in a lot of agencies, even here in the States, there may be teams of advocates, and usually a lot of them are young in their careers.
Mhm.
It's a common like first job out of college. Actually, some advocates may not even have a college degree yet. And in many ways, it's seen as like a stepping stone for
Hmm.
folks who maybe are thinking about getting a social work degree or becoming therapists down the line. And so it is like an early career kind of role. It's part of what I really love about training advocates is that I don't feel like I'm training a group of people who are sitting there looking at me like, I know all of this already. These are like wide-eyed, fresh, kind of nervous people who are suddenly have a lot of responsibility and feel totally ill-equipped in many cases.
Mhm.
And so oftentimes what you'll find is that their supervisors are social workers. The people who are
Ah.
leading the team may have those more advanced and specialized degrees.
Huh, interesting. I'm wondering if this has a like if I was just a I don't know, example of like your clients and stuff, would it be kind of like charitable organizations
Hmm.
and stuff like that? Yeah. I'm wondering if that might be the difference. Here in Sweden, a lot of the advocacy is within the social system. So there are a few like charitable organizations out and about, but mostly the state and like districts, kind of the cities are responsible for that kind of work. Really interesting how the social system like creates well is created, and that affects kind of who we train and in what ways we train them in MI.
It is interesting, yeah. And the victim advocate role as a paid professional role is relatively new in the United States.
Hmm.
So before I was born in the 1960s and 70s, there were well, I'm going to say women. They were largely women. I'm sure there were
Hmm.
some men doing this work, but largely women who would just kind of like gather together in their neighborhoods and say like, I'm a little worried about the family down the street. What should we do? And they
Ah,
would just like drive their cars up to someone's house and say like, I don't think you're safe here. Like, come with
huh.
us. And
Wow,
it
yeah.
was just like, this very organic, like neighbors looking out for neighbors, women looking out for women
Mm.
kind of thing. And in many ways, our field of victim advocacy is really proud of that, like,
Mm.
organic beginning of like, we didn't need paychecks and certifications. We just went out there and helped people. But the trend in the 80s, 90s, and now 2000s has been to professionalize this field, get people highly trained so that they're not just knocking on the door, putting themselves in danger, maybe
Mhm.
escalating things that didn't need to be escalated. And so
Yeah,
I think there's been a really positive shift toward training people to do it well rather than them just
yeah,
being well meaning, passionate advocates.
yeah,
There's, every time a field makes that shift, there's always some mixed feelings. There are some people who are like, well, I never got trained, I never got certified, and I helped a lot of people.
yeah,
I'm sure you did. I'm sure
yeah,
you did. So there's a little tension around that, but
yeah, yeah.
I feel good knowing that people are getting a lot more training and skills so that they can confidently support families.
Yeah, and that's kind of why motivational interviewing is a good thing to train, because it doesn't matter if you have like a university or master's education. You can do MI by being like a human being with another person. So that's why also I invited you to come on the radio show, because I also want to spread MI to other areas or arenas that it's not so professional. Like
Yeah.
we can all use a little bit better communication skills to handle life around us. So
I think so. And a common question I get around this work is like, well, if we use motivational interviewing to help people change, so to speak, or to make
mhm.
changes, is it really the victims of violence who need to change?
Yeah,
Isn't it the perpetrators of violence who should be doing the changing? And of Of course. However, what I like to say is people who have been victimized or have been exposed to power-based violence in all sorts of ways, they may not have done anything wrong, and I'm certain they
Mm.
didn't do anything wrong, and it's not
Yeah.
that they need to change their behavior. What we
Hmm.
find is that whether they asked for it, not asked for the violence, asked for these changes or not,
Mm.
whether they asked for these changes or not, they are still faced with a
Yeah.
lot of decisions to make. They are still
Hmm.
faced with a lot of changes that are happening around them that they did not ask for, that
Yeah.
they now have to deal with. And so
Mm.
there's all sorts of ambivalence for people who really wanted to just live their lives,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now these changes are sort of thrusted upon them. Now you've got to
Yeah.
decide, are you going to move? Are you going to leave this relationship? Are you going
Yeah.
to go to therapy? And there's all sorts of ambivalence about those things. And
Yeah.
again, these are folks who didn't ask for these changes, didn't do anything to bring it on, and yet they are now kind of burdened with having to
Yeah.
deal with them. And that's where I think motivational interviewing can be really helpful, guiding people to take some steps forward with
Mm.
the hand they've been dealt now.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because lots of things popped into my head when you were talking. The first thing was when you talked about power-based violence. I've been reading and trying to like deepen my knowledge of empowerment now that empowerment is in the spirit of motivational interviewing. And that I don't know, for some reason when I read the word empowerment, like the opposite of that is powerlessness. It's
Mm,
like I was like, oh, so what we're trying to do is help people use the power that they have inside them to
yeah.
make different choices about one thing or the other. And that's just what you've described. We need to help if you're a victim of a crime or a victim of something, you still have a choice on how you want your future to be formed based on like this experience. And that is very empowering in itself.
Hmm.
So yeah, you must be really happy that empowerment is in the spirit.
I I am. For years before it formally was a part of motivational interviewing, I would give these presentations to rooms full of victim advocates, and somebody would always raise their hand and say, well, isn't this just like being empowering or like trying
Yeah,
to empower people? And I would nod. And then one day, Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick said, we're going to put that in the book. And I was like, okay, well, I think that's going to fit nicely.
yeah.
Um, One thing that we do find with folks who feel like their power has been taken from them
Mm,
is that when they meet with someone who's trying to help them feel their power, that's a transition in and of itself. Like,
mm,
someone who for so long has felt like they have no power, someone else is in charge of me, someone else makes my
mm.
decisions. Then they meet with this like well-meaning helping professional who's like, these choices are all your own.
Yeah,
For the client there, that can feel like, I don't even know how to make decisions for myself. I haven't been able to do that for so
yeah.
long. In fact, in our Mint community, Jennifer, there was recently a discussion around coercive control. And like
Mm,
when someone's life has been so coerced and
mm.
controlled that they haven't really been autonomous to make decisions for themselves, how do
Yeah,
we then show up and say, you get to make decisions for yourself
yeah,
when they feel like, no, I don't. And
yeah.
so in motivational interviewing, it's about helping people
Exactly.
rediscover that autonomy that you do have. Maybe you've been made to believe you don't have it, or you have felt for
Mhm.
some time like you haven't had it. Let's rediscover where that is.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think in pictures, you know this about me, but I got a picture in my head about like going to the gym. Like when you're going to the gym, you're kind of not as strong as you want to be or whatever. So that's why you go and you lift weights and your biceps get big and whatever. And that's the same. I always talk about like an autonomy muscle in your brain, like because I'm not used to making decisions for myself.
Yeah.
Or the decisions that I make perhaps lead to negative consequences because I'm not thinking them through or whatever it is. So I need to like
Mm.
practice and train that muscle. And that's kind of what you're talking about is we need to start with small weights, like small decisions in order to like build up to the heavier ones.
I love that analogy. I will, like many things you say to me, I will probably end up borrowing that. Yeah, I mean, and part of the reason that analogy works so well is a lot of people, even in the gym, are much stronger than they think they are.
Yes.
And they look at the weights and say, I can't lift weights. Come to find out, they absolutely can. Now, you still have to
Hmm.
go slow so you don't hurt yourself, but
Yeah.
often you find I actually could lift some of those weights. So in
Yeah.
some ways, our physical strength is a mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And even if we're strong in one way in our body, I seem to, we're going on a gym tangent here, but when I when I was when I had my children, right, I would like, okay, I can go to body pump. I can do like all of these like lift weights and stuff because I carry around like a 2 year old and a
Um,
baby in my hand. I'm super strong. Then I go and I like could barely lift the whatever it's called, the thing. And I was like, oh my God. So, but that also, it can be like clients too, is we're used to being strong in other ways and we just have to kind
hmm.
of train ourselves to use different muscles. So, yeah, I never went back to body pump. So
I'm just realizing I could go on for hours with this analogy, but I'm going to just practice some self-restraint and just smile.
that sounds good. Okay, well, this has been really good. Good. It's been good for me because I know I've talked to you before about like what exactly is like motivational interviewing for advocates, victim advocates. And you do have a book. So if
Hmm.
anybody's wanting to like deepen their knowledge and stuff there, I will put like the link in and everything to it. Um, but I'm wondering, would you mind giving like, I don't know, maybe like three or however many your best tips of when you're training victim advocates, what could they use the most?
Ooh, three best tips. So,
Mm-hmm.
one is, and this is probably more helpful for the advocate. I would say just as helpful for the advocate as it is for the client, which
Mm-hmm.
is saying out loud the ambivalence that you seem to be noticing in the client. Like
Mm-hmm.
taking that pause to say, okay, I think you're telling me a part of you feels like this and a
Yes.
part of you feels like that. That slowing down and just saying that sentence out loud really helps both people in the
Mm.
conversation. The client may be benefiting by hearing that nice and clear, like, yes, you're understanding what I'm telling you. That's good. But the
Mm.
advocate benefits from understanding, like, so this is the road we're on. Like, there's a fork in this road, but like I'm trying to understand what road am I standing on that is forking in two different directions. Because what I find is particularly people who are new at motivational interviewing, they find themselves really lost in the forest of this conversation.
Yeah.
And they, at some point, you could stop them and say, what are you even talking about? And a lot of people would go, I don't know. No, we get so lost that if you could
Yeah.
just repeat out loud, like, this is the road I'm on. Yes,
Mm.
yes, this person may be looking, do I turn that way or that way? But
Yeah.
it helps me to just kind of place myself. So that's one tip, is to say out
Mm-hmm.
loud, so you're feeling this and this at the same time.
Right.
Um, Another tip is, oh, well, I'm gonna give an idea that is actually counter to what a lot of motivational interviewing trainers usually say.
Ooh, okay, I'm ready.
Scandalous here.
Dun, dun,
So,
dun.
yeah, most trainers I know do trainings for various audiences, and they encourage people when they are using reflective listening to not use something at the beginning like so I think you're telling me this, or so what I'm hearing you say is that. Typically we are encouraged in motivational interviewing to drop that stuff at the beginning and just reflect what you've heard. I know
Yeah.
I was trained that way.
Yeah.
Don't use those first few words where you say, I think I'm hearing you say
Mm-hmm.
this. So that's a really common way to train people. I have a slightly different take when I'm training advocates,
Okay.
because we often hear our clients say things that we may want to reflect, but we want to be really careful not to agree with.
Right.
And
Okay.
and so my way of being very careful not to agree is to say things like, okay, so through your eyes, when you look at this situation, it seems to you
Mm,
like you brought this on yourself, because people will say things like that to us, which
right.
of course I don't agree with.
Yeah.
I mean, I was an advocate in an emergency room. People would come into the hospital following violence in their homes and say, I asked for it, totally my fault, don't worry about me. If anything, I'm the abuser. That's the kinds of things people
Mm,
would say. And I wanted to be really careful. Like, if I reflect that back, it might sound like I'm agreeing when I
right.
really don't want to. I don't want to sit there and go, okay, so you brought this on yourself and you deserved it. I don't want to say any of that. So I will add in
Mm,
those things at the beginning, like, so for you, it
yeah.
feels like you bear some responsibility.
Mhm.
And I know that is a different message than you normally hear from a motivational interviewing trainer, but I have
But
found it really helpful.
you know what, Kate? It's not really that different of a message because I think because I was thinking, oh my God, we're gonna go like against each other here. No, just kidding. But like when I but if saying so for you or you've understood this to be blah 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 blah, that to me is like a very careful way of doing a reflection. But had you said, I I hear you, blah 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 blah, then you're kind of taking away the power of their thoughts, and
Mm,
that's definitely like if so I see the difference.
yeah. Oh, good. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
reflections are never really meant to be agreements, but sometimes they
Yeah.
run the risk of sounding like them.
Yeah.
So, this is just my way of saying I train advocates to be really careful not to
Yeah.
sound like you're agreeing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense, right? Because we want to be like non-judgmental and non like uh, I can't think of the word in English, but yeah, we want to keep like our neutrality, right? And
Yeah,
then yeah, and be there for both the sides. Okay, well anyway, yep. So reflective listening, really carefully not to agree is tip number 2. All right.
yeah.
Got another one?
Um, Third one is another thing that may be just a little bit different in this victim advocacy world, which is because some folks become a little concerned that motivational interviewing is about change, and
Mm.
my clients aren't the ones who need to change. It's the people who've been hurting them. They're the ones who need to change. I have loosened up even using the word change. Like
Mm.
even when I teach change talk, which I mean it's called change talk, I will say this is what it's called. If you read a motivational interviewing book, you're going to hear that this is called change talk.
Yeah.
However, if you don't like that phrase, give it some other name. And
Mm.
very often in advocacy settings, we end up describing change talk as a person's self-advocacy. It's
Oh,
it's when your clients are just advocating for themselves and what's best
yeah.
for them. And so I give everyone permission to ditch the phrase change talk if it makes them uncomfortable.
Mm.
I also tell them I'm going to keep using the phrase change talk because I do kind of feel like I should use the official.
Good
So
job.
I'm like, you're going to hear me say change talk, but that doesn't mean you need to. And
Mm.
so I give everyone permission to rename things, rebrand things however they want. And self advocacy is one that I really like.
Yeah, I like that. And that also, again, plays into the whole empowerment and like ability talk, right? Like if I'm
Yes.
advocating for myself, I'm increasing my self-esteem, my self-worth. I'm talking about self-confidence or self-acceptance. Like, yeah, I
Yeah.
like it. That's powerful. Okay, so we've got your 3 tips. Is there anything else you'd like to send away with the listeners or radio show watchers of today?
Last thing I'll just say is, you know, victim advocacy as I know it is sometimes a professional title, and sometimes it's just what you do as part of your role, but you have some
Mm,
other professional title. And so, yeah, occasionally I'm addressing a group of people who are called advocates in their workplace.
yeah.
And occasionally I'm addressing a group of people who are social workers and therapists who happen to work in domestic abuse, and they're doing a lot of the same work and having a lot of the same conversations, but their title may
Mhm.
be different. And so
Right.
I would just invite anyone listening to think about, like, are there times in your work when maybe you are kind of a victim advocate,
Mhm.
even if that's not on your business card?
Yeah. That sounds good because I think in our own ways we are advocating for rights of someone, and it could just be the person that to be heard,
Yeah.
and that can be indifferent. Oh, that's wonderful. If you've got a podcast and you've got another book, and so is it okay if I link to those things so that our listeners can contact you maybe and discuss
Yeah.
more or whatever? Okay.
That would be
So I will
wonderful.
do that. Thank you so much, Kate, for coming today. I'm all like, oh, we have to do another one about supporting autonomy and another one about empowerment. So I've got all sorts
Yeah.
of ideas now.
Okay. You know where to find me.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.